This is Appalling News. I'm Paul Chatham. Recently, we were witness to the extraordinary, painful performances of three presidents of three of the most prestigious schools in the United States at the House Committee on Education and the Workforce hearing. Congresswoman Elsie M. Stefanik, representative for New York's 21st Congressional District, asked the president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, president of MIT, Sally Kronbluth, and president of Penn State, Liz Magill, during the House hearing on anti-Semitism on campus, whether calling for the genocide of Jews was against their code of conduct. All three refused to answer definitively and obfuscated as any good bureaucrat would and said it depended on context and whether it resulted in actionable conduct, which I interpreted as they needed to see someone killed first. How many? They did not specify, but I'm certain they will be striking a committee soon to provide feedback. They cloaked themselves in the protection of the First Amendment, and that's what I wanted to talk about, not the hearings. You can review them yourself online. They are straight out of Kafka. But we know from past experiences their responses were disingenuous, as there have been people misgendering lab rats who have been expelled. And if you take a look at the freedom of speech rankings of these expensive babysitting facilities, Harvard comes in dead last, Penn State is second last, and MIT managed a 136 out of 250. Clearly, the presidents of all three schools were diversity hires. Free speech? You Americans have the strongest freedom of speech code embedded in your First Amendment. Canada, under Section 2 of the Charter, Canadians are guaranteed freedom of thought, belief, and expression. The UK has Article 10 of the 1998 Human Rights Act that protects the right to freedom of expression. I'm glad our Canadian Charter guarantees freedom of thought, because if I told you what I was thinking right now, I'd be arrested. Possibly one of the most fractious battles that's taking place in Western society is the fight for freedom of speech, and should there be limits? There already are limits. You are not allowed to yell fire in a theater, causing a panic when there isn't a fire. That seems to be the basic test. Jurisdictions are wrestling with the concept of hate speech. Should hate speech be made illegal, but then one person's hate speech is another person's hurt feelings speech? I have seen in the UK that the hate speech laws are so Byzantine that your police are spending more time cavity searching a housewife from Luton for claiming her ex, who now goes by Consuela, still has a penis, than actually dealing with the epidemic of knifings in London. The left are constantly accusing the right of hiding behind the rubric of freedom of speech. People are constantly confusing the public limits of expression with what can be said on privately owned platforms because they're stupid. Yes, YouTube will demonetize you for mentioning the illness who shall not be named, but I have a problem with all this. I am a squeamish freedom of speech absolutist. There are things I'd rather not hear. My point is, constantly testing the limits of freedom of speech should not be how we communicate with each other. A long time ago, I can remember when we were civil to each other. Pre-social media, of course. It let us get along even when we didn't like the person we were talking to. It let us get through a supermarket checkout without screaming for the manager. It let us exchange insurance information at a fender bender rather than resorting to a shootout. Wasn't civility great? Yes. We must be diligent in fighting for our right to freedom of speech or expression, but we're thinking about it wrong. Think of it as base-level code. My analogy would be something in programming called machine code, or the BIOS in a computer, a lower-level programming language. But most programs we use are coded in higher-level languages like C++ for applications and Python for web apps. They are far easier to learn and use. The digital world would grind to a halt if everything had to be written in machine code. They make programming more civil. Our higher-level language is civility. We don't have to be testing the limits of freedom of speech to get our ideas across. Just look at what a mess we're in trying to tinker with the limits of speech. Complex code gives rise to more bugs. Hate speech laws are nothing but bugs. That's why they don't work. And as the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said several thousand years ago, for every law we create, we love each other less. This has been appalling news, and that's the way it is.